Good day everyone, welcome to another lesson, and for today we will be talking about the communication in multicultural settings. Before we start, I want you to recall the time when you have to talk to someone with different race, culture, background, experiences, or nationality. How was your experience? Was it hard or difficult? What challenges did you encounter and how did you address them? Communicating with other people of various backgrounds is unavoidable. In your classroom, for an instance, your classmates came from different family, country, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Others might be born and raised on other countries. Since you are classmates, you have no choice but to communicate with each other. And as discussed in our previous lesson, one principle of communication is inevitable. So when you become part of the workforce, communicating will be more difficult and complicated as you have to deal with different people of different perspectives, personalities, and culture. So in any communication situation, it is important that you understand how various contexts, cultural diversities, and the advent of technology shape and influence the way we communicate with people not just in our community but in global community. Now let's talk about the different communication contexts. Human communication does not exist in a vacuum. It operates within a certain context. And when we say communication context, it pertains to personal, physical, social, psychological, and cultural circumstances, among others, in which communication occurs. It influences the expectation from the participants, the meaning derived in the exchange of utterances, and the subsequent action in communication. First, let's talk about the personal context. And when we say personal context, it involves the personal background of the sender and the receiver. So it includes their religion, education, culture, socioeconomic status, and beliefs that greatly influence how they communicate and interact with others. It is important that there is awareness of these kinds of information on both parties, the sender and the receiver, so that misunderstanding can be avoided and respect can be maintained. Next, let's proceed to the physical context. Physical context pertains to the environment where communication takes place. It involves tangible factors which can be easily perceived by the senses, such as temperature, humidity, odor, lighting, and noise level. For an instance, people communicating in a very humid location may feel uncomfortable, and thus communicators might not be able to concentrate on each other's message. Further, the physical context includes proximity, how far or how close to the participants, as well as the medium used in sending the message. Over the years, most communication occurs on virtual environments such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Skype. These social media platforms influences the way we send messages and the way we receive and perceive these messages. Third, we have the social context, and it refers to the kind of relationship that exists between the sender and the receiver. For example, is the way you talk to your parents is different from the way you talk to your friends. The way you talk to your friends is different from the way you talk to your teachers. Ideally, you easily communicate to people who are closer to you and you gain respect and understanding. Fourth, we have the psychological context, and it pertains or it includes the emotions and feelings of the participants in the communication process. It involves judgment and perceptions towards each other, which can play part in the transmission of the message. For example, a person who is emotionally unstable because he recently broke up with his girlfriend or partner. So this person may not readily receive your messages immediately. They are not yet ready to talk to someone. So hence, it is important to recognize one's mood or overall emotional condition in communication. Lastly, we have the cultural context. and it is the vital considerations in communication. So it includes sets of beliefs and value systems on one race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, and religion in which communication takes place. So the content and the delivery may vary from one culture to another. For instance, you do not offer pork to Muslim because it is prohibited food, which is explicitly indicated in a Quran verse. Now let's proceed to the communication and culture.
As defined, culture is a set of unique and shared beliefs, values, and norms that guide a certain group of people on how to think, behave, and act. Hence, Filipino culture pertains to the beliefs, values, and practices unique to Filipinos, shared by Filipinos, and exhibited by Filipinos. An example is how the value system of respect is manifested by the use of po and opo and the act of gestures of pagmamano, such as the kissing of elders' hands. So every Filipino practice this culture, and whenever we meet someone, or whether we talk or speak, or whether we communicate to someone who is older than us, we always insert the term po or opo to them as a sign of respect, and also the pagmamano. But other countries might have their own way of expressing politeness as well and showing respect, but the examples mentioned seem to be distinct among the Filipinos. So can you think of other countries which might have a counterpart for po and opo here in the Philippines? Communication and culture are intertwined. So in fact, they are inseparable. The culture influences what and how you communicate. So let's say that Americans are more direct and straightforward when they deliver their messages. We Filipinos, on the other hand, are non-confrontational. So we try to euphemize or use polite words or expressions in place of ideas that may come across as offensive, rude, or harsh. So we cover up these terms, these words. So instead of sounding rude, offensive, or sounding harsh, we tend to look for words that can suffice to hide the real meaning of what we are about to intend. So a very common example is when Filipinos get invited to a party or any occasion. So he or she would normally respond with, "I will try," instead of saying outright, "No, I will not attend." So more often than not, when one says, "I will try," he is uncertain whether to come or not, or 100% sometimes he or she will not attend the party. The use of expression can be a subtle way of rejecting the invitation. So to some extent, this stems from Filipino culture of saving face. So avoiding possible offense or harm which may inflict on others. Basically, these behaviors are based on cultures which are taught and transmitted from one generation to another through communication. So in order for us to increase awareness and develop competence in communicating in a multicultural setting, it is essential to unlock some cultural dimensions, provide examples, and explain how they affect communication. So we have the cultural dimensions in communication. The first dimension distinguishes individualism from collectivism. We have what we call individualistic culture. So this puts a premium on the self and personal fulfillment, while collectivist culture values teamwork and collaboration. So cultures in the first world countries such as USA, Canada, Northern and Western European countries are highly individualistic, while most of the cultures in Latin America, East and Southeast Asia, and Africa are collectivist. We're going to relate it to communication. People with an individualistic cultural background tend to be more assertive, confrontational, and direct to get things done at their own space. And we,
with a collectivist cultural background, we work more in groups and cooperate with others to avoid conflict. So we love to work with others, we love to collaborate, we love teamwork. So that's how our characteristic is. We have the second cultural dimension, which is context. Context has two categories. We have the low and high. So when we say low context culture, it views explicit words as a way to convey messages, while high context culture uses subtle and non-verbal behaviors to implicit information to convey meaning. Alright, so let's say for example, people in the USA, Germany, Scandinavia have low context culture. So those countries have low context culture because their verbal messages are direct, definite, and also detailed, while Latin American and most Asian cultures have high context culture. So therefore, the verbal messages of people from these countries are unclear and mostly indirect. When people who have low context cultures interact with people from high cultures, they have to be sensitive to each other's message. And people from low context cultures have to pay attention to the body language and also to the gestures of those from high context cultures. Why? Because they might need to ask for clarification for vague messages. So people from high context culture need not to be offended if they receive direct messages and assertions from people with low context culture because it is normal to them. Another cultural dimension is the chronamics. Chronamics pertains to the concept of time among cultures. So under chronamics, we have monochronic culture, wherein it advocates punctuality, time completion of tasks, and accomplishment of one task at a time. From the word mono, one task at a time. Schedule matters in a monochronic culture. The dominant culture of USA has a monochronic sense of time. On the other hand, we have what we call polychronic culture. It has a more fluid and flexible concept of time. So in this culture, the task, interruption, and multitasking are acceptable practices, and also in here, maintaining relationships is more important than strictly following a schedule. So Latin American, Arab, and Southern European cultures are more flexible when it comes to time, since monochronic culture views time as something very important, and people from this culture might be annoyed with a person with a polychronic cultural background who arrives late. So in this case, both parties need to be more flexible and sensitive to each other's time. Next, we have the fourth cultural dimension. So it is termed as uncertainty avoidance. It refers to the need to foresee what is going to happen. Alright, so let's talk about low uncertainty avoidance culture. It is tolerant of unpredictable and uncontrollable situations. It usually maintains few rules as possible and allows for the spontaneity of responses to situations. While highly uncertainty avoidance culture, it values precision and always attempts to participate risks to possibly reduce them. In order for us to make it possible, rules and systems are created. Let's say people from USA, Sweden, and Denmark, they are more tolerable of unpredictable people, events, or situations because they have low uncertainty avoidance orientation. So while people from Germany, Portugal, Greece, Peru, and Belgium, they have low tolerance of uncertainty, and they tend to control unpredictable people or situations because of their high uncertainty avoidance culture. So people having high uncertainty avoidance culture use precise language and ask a lot of questions. So these people are more particular about the rules and systems. However, people from low uncertainty avoidance culture
might find the imposition of too much rules and systems quite upsetting and asking a lot of questions too demanding. So in terms of relationship building, in order for you to jive to each other, people having high uncertainty avoidance culture would rather date or meet with family and friends. But for people having low uncertainty avoidance, culture meeting strangers or initiating new relationship are fun and exciting. The fifth cultural dimension is to be considered when communicating is the extent to how equality or inequality of power is expected or accepted. This is referred to as power distance. So in power distance, we have two. We have the low power distance and high power distance. Low power distance culture values equal distribution of power, equality. So this is observed in the cultures of Austria, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and United States. Though power exists, people from this culture value democracy and egalitarian behavior. Conversely, high power distance culture recognizes that an equal distribution of power is normal. So this type of culture is evident in countries in the Middle East, Malaysia, Guatemala, Venezuela, and Singapore. This cultural dimension is particularly reflected on how people communicate with individuals who hold authority. So if you belong to the low power distance culture, you might be comfortable challenging to status quo or arguing with your boss. Otherwise, you may exhibit a high power distance culture wherein you are just likely to follow any rule without question. So what do you think the kind of power distance we have as Filipinos? Are we under low power distance culture or high power distance culture? Alright, let's proceed to the sixth cultural dimension. It pertains to gender. We have masculinity or femininity. Masculine cultures advocate for strict adherence to conventional gender roles and behaviors. So in this culture, masculine roles are more valued than feminine roles. And in feminine culture, it is based on the premise that men and women assume varieties of roles and thus are both valued regardless of their sex and gender. In Mexico and Italy and also Japan, they have highly masculine cultures in which the role of males is highly valued than the role of females. If you go to Sweden, Denmark, and Norway, there seems to be no male supremacy because males and females are viewed equally in terms of the role in their society. So driven by a high standard of performance, assertiveness, and competitiveness, men having a high masculine cultural background are not to emphasize well with others and exhibit compassion, while women tend to be more silent and passive. So for men and women in feminine cultures, they are able to empathize, sympathize, argue, and assert themselves without necessarily being abhorred by society. And finally, we have the long-term or short-term orientation. So this refers to how patience is valued in waiting for the outcomes of actions. First, let's talk about the short-term orientation culture. It is characterized by being very performance-driven. It emphasizes quick results, fulfillment of social obligations, and efficient revenue generation. Therefore, it values rewards in the here and now. Meanwhile, in long-term orientation, it is more laid back and it is more patience in waiting for the outcomes of an action. It values what we call perseverance in waiting for the outcomes of an action. It also values perseverance towards achievement of goals. So countries with short-term orientation culture include USA, Pakistan, Russia, Canada, Norway, and the United Kingdom. For people from these countries, work time is separated from leisure time. So these countries want quick results. And people from Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan belong to the low-term orientation culture. So they can judge or they can juggle work time and leisure time together. So they are more patient when it comes to waiting for rewards of their hard work. So in talking about someone from short-term oriented culture, it might be impolite to talk about business during lunch or dinner time. However, this will not be a big issue for someone who belongs to the long-term oriented culture, since he or she can mix working time and leisure time.
An understanding of these cultural dimensions is an integral of becoming an intercultural communicator who is competent in interacting, dealing with other people in situations in multicultural and diverse settings. A competent intercultural communicator interprets and shares meanings with individuals from different diversity, with individuals from different cultures with accuracy, respect, and a high level of sensitivity. Alright, there you have it. That concludes our lesson for today, and you just have learned the different communication contexts, communication and culture, and last is the cultural dimensions in communication. I hope guys that you have learned something, and I'll see you next time.